Hello, everyone, and welcome to this little lesson about European institutions. So this is part of your YMCA Leadership Academy course about advocacy. Why are we talking about European institutions? Because of course, when we talk about advocacy, we really need to know who are we talking to. Otherwise, it's a little bit difficult to know what we can do and what we cannot do. So here we are. It's a little travel through the major European institutions in Europe that we advocate to, and also the main platforms that we use to do so. So we get a little bit into the thick of it, and we'll talk about, first of all, the European Union and the Council of Europe. These are the two main institutions that we advocate to, and they are the most important regarding youth policy and also many other policies that we might be interested to. So the European Union has 27 member countries. It used to be 28, but after Brexit, it's 27. Everything it does, it's based on specific treaties that contains mostly human rights and competencies. The rules are enacted directly. This is what makes the EU very different than the UN. It's not about recommendations that then rely on the goodwill of the member states. It's about laws that, if they're not enacted, then countries can go to a court to make them implement. And if that doesn't happen, the member state has to pay a fine, and that fine gets enforced. On the other hand, we have the Council of Europe, which is not an EU institution, it's an other body, an institution altogether. Its main goal is simply to defend human rights. It also works on education and youth, and it has 47 member countries. So the EU is 27, the Council of Europe 47. You can see it's quite big. And under the Council of Europe, there's the management also of the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, and the Council of Europe seat is in Strasbourg too. So these are the two main institutions we work with. The main actors of the European Union, these are very important. Who are the institutions within the EU that you talk to? There's three, most importantly: the European Commission, the European Parliament, and the European Council. Tricky. This is why it's really hard. This is why it was not made to be easy. The European Council is not the Council of Europe. The Council of Europe is not the EU. So what's the job of the European Commission? What does it do? It drafts laws and it implements the approved laws through programs. So it manages funding. So we say that the Commission has the monopoly of the initiative of law, but it also is in charge with implementing the laws. Let's say it resembles the work that the government does at a national level. Each member state nominates a candidate to the Commission. So we have 27 commissioners. So once the member state nominates one candidate as a commissioner, as a member of the Commission, the European Parliament scrutinizes this person. And if the candidate is not adequate, if they found them guilty of corruption, of being against EU fundamental values, the candidate is rejected, and the state has to nominate a new one. This is the democratic oversight over the European Commission, and it has started in 2000. And since then, many commissioners have been rejected. There's many cases. You can look up Rocco Buttiglione and you can look up other cases. Each commissioner has a portfolio. So what does that mean? Each commissioner has a job. It's like a minister. So there's the commissioner for education, the one for agriculture, etc. Under each commissioner, there's a director general called DG. It's a team of civil servants that does the director general work. It's like a ministry, basically. And the second institution, which is very, very important in the EU, is the European Parliament. It is its main democratic body. It is directly elected by each European citizen in the 27 countries. And 751 members of the European Parliament, and the MEPs regroup by big European political parties and groups. For example, the European People's Party, Socialists and Democrats, ECR, EFD, Greens, etc. You can look them up on the internet and you can see, for example, to what that corresponds from your country as well. The members of the European Parliament are divided also by committees. So each MEP is a member of a political party, yes, but also they are members of legal committees. The laws are voted first in a committee, and then they're voted in the main plenary of the European Parliament. So in a committee, you would have representatives from each of the political parties and also from each of the countries. For example, if there's a committee on education and youth, you will have, for example, its chair would be a German person from the EPP, and then you would have a shadow chair from the S&D, and then a shadow chair from Greens, etc., etc. And then you will have amongst the members, other members from the S&D, Greens, EPP, etc. And then you have the intergroups. They are kind of interest groups. They make sure that all MEPs pay attention to some issues. They don't have the power of the committees to vote laws within them first, but they can mobilize votes. For example, members of an intergroup can campaign to other members of parliament before the plenary session and ask them, for example, please vote for this in the interest of youth. So there is not a committee on youth. So there would be an intergroup on youth, and the intergroup on youth will make sure that the interests of young people are looked after by lobbying other members of parliament. And so as an MEP, you will be member to two or three committees, and you can also be member of an intergroup. I talked about plenaries. What does that mean? That's very odd thing of the European Parliament is that it doesn't have only one seat, it's got two. It regularly meets in Brussels, especially the committee meetings, but then once a month it meets in Strasbourg, where it holds its plenary session. The plenary session is where you find the final vote, where every MEP can vote on every law. While in the committee, you only have a selected amount of people, around 40, 49 people who vote on the first draft of that law. Third institution, we looked at the Commission, we looked at the Parliament, now we look at the Council or Councils. Now we'll see why we call them, there's more than one council. We mentioned the European Council. It is a European institution. And who's inside the European Council? The heads of state. They are in charge only of big treaty changes or big policy changes, and it gives input for big developments. So they don't meet all the time for every law. They give the broad strategy, let's call it that way. And then we have the Council of the European Union. It is an EU institution as well, and it regroups 27 ministers. These 27 ministers are not always the same. According to the topic, the Council of the European Union has different formations. So there's, when they have to decide on agricultural laws, there's 27 ministers of agriculture from these 27 countries. When it's about a decision on education, it's 27 ministers of education from the 27 countries, etc. They are part of what we call the ordinary legislative process, and where they work with the European Parliament and the European Commission to create laws. The presidency of the Council of the European Union rotates every 6 months. Don't consider Romania and Finland. Now it's Portugal, the European presidency, and the next one is Slovenia. So what's the job of the Council of the European Union? That's the most important thing you have to remember. They are the main actors that work on laws. So if you want to advocate on a specific law on behalf of young people, who are the three institutions you have to talk to? Preferably the European Commission, because they're in charge of the very first draft. So if you influence the very first draft, that's where you are going to weigh the most, but it's not easy to talk to the European Commission. Then equally, you should talk to the committee in charge within the European Parliament and to the permanent representation people, so the people and the ministers within the Council of the European Union and the member states. So you should go to your own minister too. And like that, you would have touched upon every stage to the decision-making process, which we're going to look at afterwards. So the European Union and its institutions, what do they do? How do they work? The Commission, as we said, drafts a new law. The Parliament and the Council have the power to amend it. They have the same power to amend it in the ordinary legislative process. The law then that gets approved is implemented everywhere in Europe in the same way. Do you remember at the very first time we said the EU is based on competencies? What does it mean? To know what are the powers of the EU on a specific topic, we have to look at the treaties. So the EU has different levels of competencies. On some topics like the environment, the agriculture, competition, it has absolute competency, which means its powers are more important than those than the member states. This is very important. This is not the case for the UN. This is not the case for any other international institution. For the EU, this is the case. The law that the EU makes on environment, agriculture, and competition, if one of the member countries makes a law that is in contrast to European law on topics like environment, agriculture, and competition, that law is null, does not exist. It's gonna have to be striked. And on other topics like youth policy, that's very different, for example. Youth policy and education generally pertains to the main competency of member states, but the EU can give broad directions, for example, and it does so more and more. Why? Especially regarding formal education. And if you think about the Erasmus program, for example, this actually touches on a very important competency of the EU, which is the free movement of people. And of course, for people to be able to freely move and freely work in each and every state, their degrees need to be recognized, their education needs to be recognized and equalized across the countries. So you can understand how, even though formally the EU doesn't have full competencies around education, the powers the EU have are increasing more and more, the closer the economies and the citizens of the EU get with time. So how does this decision-making process work? Have a look at this. You're not going to find it everywhere. So first of all, as we said, the European Council, the big heads of state, they kind of draft a 5-year plan and yearly plans for the EU to work every year. So you will have in this 5-year, 7-year plan, actually, you will have the main topics that need to be touched. What does it mean? If it's not in this plan, it's not going to happen in the next 7 years, right? Then the European Commission has the obligation to create initiatives of law on the basis of this document. So the European Commission will start drafting those laws, right? At the same time, the draft of this law will go to what we call the European Parliament rapporteur. How does it work? Inside the European Parliament, for each, of course, we know already for the next 7 years, which will be the topics upon which the Commission will do a draft of law. So in the Parliament, the members of the European Parliament will lobby to see themselves assigned as rapporteur to specific projects of laws. Why? For example, if you come from a constituency, if the people who voted for you come from a place where there's a lot of coal mines, for example, if there is a law that is going to, for example, abolish coal mines, for example, to follow environmental laws, then you have an interest to follow this process closely to make sure that your constituents, those workers, are protected, and that there will be measures to make sure that they will be retrained, have another job, or have income substitution or things like that. So this draft of law made by the European Commission goes to the EU rapporteur. And of course, this rapporteur, can only be in the committee of the European Parliament that is competent for this topic. So if it's environment, it will be the ENVI committee. At the same time, the draft of the European Commission goes to the Council of the EU, which drafts its own opinion in the necessary formation. In this case, we said an environmental law, so it's going to be the environmental ministers of the 27 countries that will draft an opinion on this. So the rapporteur and the committee will work on voting on a first report, on a first draft of this law. And this draft of this law then will be voted first in the committee and then in the plenary. The Council of the EU will make its own amendments to this document, and the two institutions will have to agree on the same text of law. If they cannot agree, then we go to what we call a trilogue. Now, trilogues were very rare before, but now they're very common. What's a trilogue? If the two institutions do not get to an agreement on something, then it all goes to the negotiation of three people. The rapporteur, and gives its power to the president of the European Parliament. So the president of the European Parliament has to defend the text that was approved within the European Parliament plenary. And the head of the presidency, so say at this moment it would be the presidency of Portugal, and the European Commission representative, they will sit at the table, the three of them, Parliament, Commission, and Council, and they will agree on a final text. Now, back in the day, the trilogue was rare, as I said. Now it's very common. And once and these three people have all the power to agree on any compromise, possibly sticking to the text as much as possible. And once this compromise is achieved, then the law passes and it gets to be implemented all across Europe. We didn't talk also about the two different types of laws. It can be a regulation, a much stronger piece of law. The way in which is written is the way in which it will be implemented. Very little space for interpretation. Or a directive. A directive leaves more space for the member states to find ways to implement this law. They have obligation of results, so specific results they have to achieve, but the way in which they get there is less described as it would be in a regulation. So here we arrive at a little part that I call the devil's advocate. You might have heard a lot. So here we've simply limited ourselves to describe the European institution, how do they work, and how the decision-making process works. But you might have heard a lot of opinions on these topics. Maybe you never heard how it worked before, but you certainly have heard a lot of things about the EU. So one of the main things that he said is the EU is not democratic at all. It's totally undemocratic. People decide in the shadow, etc., etc. To decide what you think on this topic, you have to ask yourself a couple of questions that hopefully this presentation might help you to decide for yourself. First of all, you have to ask yourself who elects who. For example, people of Europe, anyone above 18, and in Austria above 16, directly elects the European Parliament. Also, people elect directly their national governments, as you well know. National governments then become the representation that is present in the Council of the EU. National governments also propose commissioners, as you remember. The European Parliament, who's directly elected by people, has the power to approve and reject commissioners. So, as you can see, you have to ask yourself, where do I come in? Where's my power? My power is to elect directly the European Parliament. I elect my national government. My national government that I elect has the power to become one institution, the Council, to propose another institution member, the Commissioner. And then my representative through the European Parliament has the power to approve or reject those commissioners. This is information you need to know to decide for yourself, is this enough scrutiny for you? And you might as well want to compare it to the system within your own country to decide if this is something that is enough for you, for example. Another question you have to ask yourself, other than who elects who, is also who decides on what. So you have to remember here the decision-making process. The Council of the EU, the national governments, they make the 7 years agenda, right? Then the Commission proposes the laws who can only derive from the agenda. The Commission cannot come up with a new topic that wasn't there. And the Parliament and the Council have the power to amend or approve these laws. So these are other topics you need to remember. So if people say it like that only an institution has the power to decide, or that only other two have, here's where you can find your little guide to see who decides on what. These are the two questions you need to ask yourself. These questions are also very important to know who to talk to, obviously. And so it's very important to understand who decides on what. So at which stage are we in the decision-making process? Are we already at the level of a trilogue? then what's my power to advocate? Very little. We are at the very end. We can't change anything. Are we at the level of the draft of the commission? My power to change that text can be very broad. The problem is I need to have access to the commission, which is not that easy because it's like an office of a ministry. It's not super easy to get access to it. What's my access to the parliament? Do I know my MEP? Do I know the MEP from my region? Do they have an interest in young people, etc., etc.? In that case, my interest is to get to the rapporteur, because the rapporteur is the one was the highest power at that early stage of the law to shape the side of the parliament. At the same time, I come from a specific country, so obviously I should build a relationship with my ministry, and my minister possibly to give them what are my priorities and my agenda for that specific piece of law. Nothing can happen without the interaction of all of this. So another institution that we want to talk about is the Council of Europe. The main themes of the Council of Europe are human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, as we said. Remember, we said members of the Council of Europe are 47 countries. If you look at the membership of YMCA Europe, all of us are covered by it. The main department that it's really important for us is the youth department, of course, which gets to decide on thematics on youth. But the supremely important body for us is the Advisory Council on Youth. What is that? This is a group of young people elected by youth organizations, either within the European Youth Forum, which we will talk about in the next session, or elected through a call for participation. And they participate in a system of co-management. It's a partnership between youth organizations and governments. And this Advisory Council on Youth has basically 50% it's representative of youth organization and 50% is ministries, and they both work together to establish standards and work priorities for the Council of Europe youth sector.